Thank you all for joining us for this very special shir. As you mentioned, shows who is really dedicated, modern day Maccabees who are coming out on the coldest night to hear inspiration from the amazing Rebbetzin. Baruch Hashem. I thank the Shul, Sigalit, Rebbetzin Albaz for partnering together with Chazaq on tonight's very special event. It's being dedicated Liloi Nishma Istam Duktar Bat Zilpad, Daniel Ben Sarah, Neshamot Shav Naliyah, and Refuah Shalom Ima Shalom Emma Bat Esther. We have a very special program tonight. Rebbetzin Amit Yaghoubi. She's part of Chazaq's outreach programs for teenagers, and of course she inspires young and old, everyone. She speaks in different communities. Baruch Hashem, Chazaq. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. So there was a great rabbi. His name was Rav Gedalia Eisen. And he had a yeshiva of Bachrim. And he was very close with one particular Bacher. And he noticed that this Bacher, he did everything correctly. He came to Seder on time. He learned during Seder. But also, he was very makpid on his breaks. Whenever there was a break, he would fully take advantage of the break. And the Rebbe was very close with this Talmud. And he felt like he was going to give him a little bit of musar. And he calls this Talmud into the room. And he says to his Talmud, who was one of the top guys in the yeshiva, he says to him, you know, after 120, you're not going to get any schar for limud Torah that you learned. And the student is like, "What, Rebbe, what do you mean? I'm a pretty good bacher. Like, I come on time. And he says, no. After 120, you're going to go up to Shamayim, and you know who's going to get the schar for your Torah learning? Who? He says, my yeshiva. So the boy is not really sure, where's the Rebbe going? And he says, you know why my yeshiva is going to get the schar for all of your Torah learning? Because they're going to say, did he learn? And they're going to say, he learned when everybody was learning. What else was he going to do? The yeshiva instituted that everybody should be learning at these times, and so he learned when everybody was doing it. But when he was on his own time, he didn't learn. And so therefore, he doesn't get the schar, the reward for the Torah learning. The yeshiva gets it because they were the ones who set up the infrastructure. And he looks at his beloved Talmud in the eyes and he says to him, Yoshua, you want to know how you're going to get the schar for all of the hours that you spend learning Torah during the yeshiva time? How, he says? He says, when it's not obligated to learn, and you learn, then what happens is they say, this is somebody who loves learning. And so therefore, even if there wouldn't have been yeshiva schedule, he would have found time to learn. And so therefore, all of his hours that he learned during yeshiva schedule, he gets credit for as if he learned them on his own. We read the parsha, Vayechi Yaakov be'eretz Mitzrayim. 17 shana, he was there 17 years. 17 years, Gematria Tov. Why say Chazal? Because in those 17 years, Yaakov Avinu had his head in the Gemara. He was learning, he was shayging his biggest amount of limud Torah during those 17 years. And Chazal say, why was that the time where we talk about Yaakov Avinu's Avodat Hashem of his time in Mitzrayim? Because when he was learning in Yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever, so he was learning in Yeshiva of Shem Ve'ever. And then he had big nisyonot. And you know how it is, Lo Aleinu should only be on Sonei Yisrael, but whenever sometimes there's a tragedy, a person says, wow, this tragedy is going to bring me closer to Hashem. I need Hashem. Now I realize how badly I need Hashem. So he's going through all of his nisyonot, and he's close to Hashem. But then he finally comes. He's an old man. He's at the end of his life. Baruch Hashem, he raised a beautiful family. He's living in a palace. His son is the viceroy of Egypt. He's being taken care of. At this point in Yaakov Avinu's life, he could have been like, exhale, chill. I'm just going to relax a little bit. But Yaakov Avinu had the same amount of strength and dedication in his 17 years of Mitzrayim that he had throughout all the very spiritual times, the very challenging times. Vayechi Yaakov. And that's what gave him Chaim. We read a parsha of Vayechi, of Chaim, And yet it's talking about the death of Yaakov, the death of Yosef, the death of the tribes of the Shvatim, when we're going to start to transfer into Shemot, which becomes the life of Bnei Yisrael, no more the individual Shvatim. And so why is the parsha of death called life? And the answer is because we assess our lives by what we leave when we leave this world. For what are you living? If you had free time, if you were off duty, so to speak, what do you turn to? Do you turn to Kedusha? Do you turn to Hashem? Does letting my hair down, so to speak, mean now I just need a break from all of the spiritual stuff? Can I find my connection with Hashem as being the sweetness of what life is all about? You know, they say a story of this Goyish couple who were in love with each other, and family and society were giving them a lot of problems, and everybody was saying, you have to break up, you have to break up. And they say, you know what, I can't believe it, our families are not supporting us, nobody is supporting us, we're going to show them if we can't be together in life, let's pull a Romeo and Juliet, and let's die together in our love. And then we'll show all of the haters. And so they decide to plan this very romantic jumping off a bridge day. And they are going through this, how are they going to jump off the bridge together? And they're going to leave notes to their families. And our love will be strong in our death. And each one, after they come up with the idea, and they love the idea, but each one individually on their own is kind of thinking like, maybe it's not such a good idea to kill ourselves together. But when one of them brings it up, the other one is like, well, you don't love me? You don't want to live alive with me? And then the same thing happens with the other one also, and so neither of them say anything to the other. And it comes the big day, and they go up to the top of this bridge, and each one is reading her love note and his love note to the other, how much I love you, and we'll meet together in the next world. And they have all their posts that are automatically going to go up on their social media. You world, you hated us, but we're going to be together, ha ha ha, in your face. And each one is thinking in the back of their mind, are we really doing this? But they don't verbalize it to each other. And they hold on to their hands, 10, 9, 8, and the man is thinking to himself, okay, listen, I couldn't say anything to her when we were alive together, but I don't want to die right now. And I also don't want to live with her alive with knowing that I didn't want to die with her, because she'll make my life miserable. And so 7, 6, 5, and he's thinking and he's thinking and he's looking at her, and she's like gung-ho ready. 4, 3, and he makes a decision which he had been thinking about beforehand, and he says 3, 2, 1, and he makes as if he's going to jump, but then he lets go of her hand. And she goes flying down, and there's the look of shock on her face. And as he sees her flying down, he's like, oh my God, what did I do? I'm awful, I'm terrible. And before she hits the bottom, he sees a parachute open up, and she lands. And the question, my friends, is, who betrayed who? No one is free from blame. Everyone has a piece to take. In Hebrew, the word is achrayus. Responsibility for what? Actions I took. Each one can yell at the other, how could you, how could you, how could you? But each one has to look inside of himself, of herself, and see, well, what was my responsibility in it? And to be great and to be large, a person has to have achrayus, responsibility. If I try to avoid responsibility, and our human nature is to blame other people, it's because of them, it's because of him, it's because of her. Why did you get me angry? Our tendency is to try to blame others. If a person doesn't take achrayus, it causes ichur. Ichur in Hebrew with the same letters spells delay. When we don't take achrayus, we create a delay in our Yeshua, in our salvation, whether it's in our personal lives, whether it's in our Yeshua as Am Yisrael, to be able to take achrayus is to bring salvation into this world, to step up and say, this was my part in the play of life, in our history, how it unfolded, and I will own where I need to own and have big enough shoulders to do that. The Medrash tells of a man who falls into a ditch and he's screaming for help, but nobody is around. And he realizes 24 hours go by, nobody is there to help him. He feels his stomach rumbling, and he realizes if he doesn't somehow get out, he's going to die of starvation at the bottom of this ditch. And he's screaming for help, nobody is coming by. And very strange, the language is, he takes his hair and he pulls on his hair and he pulls himself up out of the ditch. Now, obviously, it's not meant to be taken literally because you can't actually do that. And so what's the lesson? What's the concept of hair? He pulled his hair and got himself out of the ditch. It's so interesting. Yaakov Avinu and his twin brother Esav are born. And they're definitely not identical twins, because right away from the beginning, the Torah tells us that Yaakov Avinu was Ish Chalak. He had smooth skin. And Esav was Ish Sa'ir. He was very hairy. So what? Why do we need to know that Yaakov was smooth and Esav was hairy? And we see this later when Rivka Imenu tells Yaakov, Yalla, Yitzchak is going to give the brachas to Esav. You need to go in and take the blessings. And what does Yaakov say? Yaakov says, Ima, I can't do it. Ulai yemusheni avi. Maybe my father is going to touch me. And he says, I'm smooth skinned and my brother Esav is very hairy. He'll know the difference. And we know what Rivka suggests to fix the problem. What's the solution? She takes the coat of Esav, which the Medrash tells us was like goat skins. It was the skins of Gedi Izim, of goat, and she put it onto him so that it was skin tight on him, so it felt like it was his skin. Now that was not the only goat that was being used in this episode, but Esav was told to bring food for Yitzchak. So what does Rivka do? Rivka makes a delectable meal of Gedi Izim, of her goats that she had in her dowry, and she cooks it delicious, and she gives it to Yaakov. Yaakov wearing the goat skins and carrying a meal of this goat, of this Gedi, to bring it in and to take the bracha. And Yaakov Avinu receives brachos that were not originally intended for him. And along with the brachos that were not originally intended for him, he was also given achrayus, responsibility that was not originally intended for him. He took upon himself the blessings of Esav, and he took upon himself the spiritual job of Esav, which was to go out in the world and to spread Judaism. What does it have to do with being hairy and with the goat skins? Every month has a different mazal associated with it. And the month of Chodesh Tevet is the Gedi, the mountain goat. Have you ever seen a mountain goat on a mountain? After class, Google it. It is the most fascinating video you will see. There is this animal called the mountain goat, the ibex, and when you watch it climb up mountains, it goes almost vertically up the mountains. It jumps over mountains as if it completely defies gravity. It has it's the most incredible thing to watch. How does it work? And Chachamim tell us that the month of Tevet is the month with the most potential negative energy of the whole year. It's the darkest month, so much so that there's no way we would have been able to make it through Tevet if we wouldn't have had a little bit of the Hanukkah light at the beginning of Chodesh Tevet. We have no other holiday on the Jewish calendar that transcends both months. Only Hanukkah, purposely done because Hashem knew Tevet needs a little bit of strength because it's such a potentially negative month. but we know everything is equal and opposite. And so for however much negative potential energy that Tevet has, if we're able to overcome it, there's an incredible wealth of positive blessing we can bring in our life. So just like Yaakov Avinu was able to bring a blessing in his life that wasn't originally intended to him, how can you and I bring blessing into our lives that maybe wasn't even originally intended for us? And what does it have to do with a gedi, with this mountain goat that is the mazal of Chodesh Tevet, that is Yaakov Avinu puts on the gedi on his hands and serves the gedi to his father? What's the difference between being hairy and being smooth? And so Kabbalistically, hair represents the capacity to hold on to dirt. So if you think about it, if you have, why was it when there were prisoner situations, they shave everybody's hair, they shave all the hair off? Because hair holds on to dirt, to lice, to disease. If you shave it off, you keep things much cleaner because hair holds on to things. What's the idea of Esav was an ish sa'ir? Esav knew how to hold on to the proverbial dirt of this world. He was able to hold on to tum'ah. He was able to hold on with a long memory. What's the koach of a Jew? The koach of a Jew is to be chalak, to be smooth, to be able to get dirty and wash it back off. Get dirty, wash it back off. When we go through difficult things in life, it's the spiritual hair that holds on to it. How can we smoothen out so we can clear ourselves from the excess stuff that we're carrying? We recently read that when Yosef HaTzadik was taken out of the pit, it says, Vayaratsuhu min habor, and they quickly ran him out of the pit. Ladies, he wasn't in a pit. He was in jail. He was in the Beit Sohar. So why does the Torah tell us they pulled him out of the pit and brought him in front? They shaved him, they took off all his hair, and they brought him in front of the Paro. Because whenever we hear about Yosef and the pit, we think about an event that happened many years before Yosef got thrown into jail. We think about his brothers throwing him into the pit. And when Yosef's brothers threw him into the pit, can you imagine the trauma of Yosef HaTzadik? Legitimate trauma. His brothers abandoned him. He's an orphan, he doesn't have a mother. He has no idea that Yaakov Avinu is not in on it. To him, his father probably abandoned him as well. And he's left alone, a young boy, sold into Egypt, trying to make something of himself. And then he gets thrown again into jail. And Yosef spent every day running from the pit, running from that moment of legitimate trauma that he had, saying, I will not allow what happened to me to define me. We live in a world that almost glorifies victimhood, where we try to find ways to talk about how much of a victim I am. Now, I'm not saying to become toxically positive and pretend like bad things didn't happen. Bad things happen, and trauma is real. And real hurtful things that happen need to be acknowledged. But are you just that? Is my whole life defined by that bore moment of my life? By the pain that I went through? Or am I going to say, yes, those bad things happened to me, but I'm not going to sit and make myself into a Nebuch victim and blame the whole world. How come they weren't there for me? And how come this and how come that? Even though Those are legitimate and good questions. I'm not going to fall into that trap. Instead, I'm going to pull myself together and see what can I do to make this world a better place so that more situations like that don't happen. I met an incredible woman who suddenly lost her husband, Lo Aleinu. And she said to me something so, I was left speechless after talking to her about what she went through and how she's coping with it now and the pain that she misses him every day. She said to me, you know, Amit, I'm going to say something that's going to sound so off, but she was telling me all of the different things and her sensitivity that she has to people who experience sudden loss and what she's done to be able to understand people in a way she was never able to understand before, and different kinds of things and initiatives that she started. And she said, I would have never imagined myself being me who I am today if I wouldn't have experienced that loss. That we come from a people that are Chazaq. We come from a people that could have insane tragedy happen and yet somehow make a spin on that tragedy and not say, oh, it was good, it was fine. Say, it was painful. It was bad. I was low, deep down in a ditch. But I'm not going to let that define me. I'm going to pull on my hair and pull myself out. I'm not going to let it leave a stain on who I am and keep me stuck in that situation. The mountain goat climbs on a mountain in a way that defies what we look at as normal. Because the koach of a mountain goat, the koach of the month of Tevet, is the koach of being in the darkest place of my life and yet somehow finding strength, finding koach to jump over hurdles in a way that's unspeakable. And if we're spiritually sensitive, we're able to tap into that energy now. There was a man who in the early 1900s lived in Europe and had a very hard time making parnasa, and someone told him, go to America, collect money, and then come back, and that's how you'll send money eventually to be mefarnes to your family, and then come back and live. And so he goes to America, and he very quickly discovers that the streets are not lined with gold. It's a hard life over here. But he works hard, and he makes $1, and he makes a couple of dollars, and he's almost ready with a schum, with a sum, to be able to go back to Europe and live with his family. And World War I breaks out. World War I breaks out, and there's no more travel. He can't just go across the ocean and go back home, and he's devastated. He's already been in America for so many years. He has kids, he has his wife, his life, everything happening, and already he's missed out on such a big chunk. He wants to go back. And every month that goes by and he can't go back, he's falling deeper and deeper into despair. I want to see my family already. And someone gives him an idea. You know what? Why don't you go and volunteer to be in the army? They need soldiers, and they'll send you to Europe to fight, and then you'll be able to get back and be with your family. And he says, it's a brilliant idea. And so he goes and he fills out the paperwork. He wants to enlist in the army as a volunteer, and they do all the tests on him, and they say, we're going to be in touch with you. And he gets a letter in the mail a week later. Thank you so much for trying to enlist, but there was something with his muscle spasms or whatever. You're not a candidate to be a soldier in our army. And he looks at this rejection letter and he says, Ribono Shel Olam, I don't understand. I want to be back with my family. It's not like I'm asking you for something crazy. It's not like I want to be back with my family, to help my wife, to raise my children. What am I going to, how could you reject this for me? And he's very, very sad. And the war goes on, and the years drag on, and he misses bar mitzvahs, and he misses one of his children's getting married. But eventually the war ends. And eventually he makes it back to Europe. And he missed a huge chunk of his family's life. But okay, they're back together, and we have to make the best of it. What are you going to do? And a few more years go by. And what eventually happens? World War II breaks out soon after. World War II breaks out and the Nazi chokehold is getting tighter. And everybody's rushing to the embassies to try to get visas to get out of the inferno. And everyone in his town is systematically refused a visa. There is no way to get out. This is what's going to be. He's already an old man. He has great-grandchildren. What's going to be? This is how we're going to end our life. And he has an idea. And he goes back to the American embassy and they tell him, there are no more visas for your people. Stop. You don't need to keep coming here. Stop coming here. And he says, no, no, no. He says, I'm a patriot. I'm an American patriot. And they look at him and they say, what are you talking about? You're just another Jew trying to get a free ride to America right now, but our quotas are full. He says, no, I love America. I'm an American patriot. I even tried to enlist as a volunteer in the American Army. That's how much I love America. They say to him, what are you talking about? Nobody here has, he says, check the records. And they look at his papers, they open it up, and they see, yes, years ago, he tried to enlist in the American Army. He was rejected, but they're blown away. Actually, we met somebody over here in Jewland who's a patriot of America. Okay, they tell him, give us the names of every single member of your family. We're writing you visas right now. And all of his children and grandchildren were given visas, and they left on one of the last exits, and they were all saved. Because when it's not a happy ending, it's not yet the ending. We just have to be able to cultivate the savlanos, the patience, until we can see the full story. We have to be able to keep on climbing and keep on moving upwards, even in the face of what looks like tragedy. On Friday, we're going to be fasting Asarah B'Tevet. And as we know, that every single fast, aside from Yom Kippur, if it falls on Shabbos or Erev Shabbos, it gets pushed off, even Tisha B'Av. The only fast that we would fast on Shabbos is Yom Kippur, which it falls out sometimes on Shabbat, Shabbat Shabbaton, and Asarah B'Tevet, the 10th of Tevet. And this year we're going to be fasting into Shabbat. And you know, everybody is asking, which minyan is your husband going to? Is it going to be a long one? Because you're fasting until Kiddush. Everybody better speed it up. What's the big deal with Asarah B'Tevet? And Chazal tell us that really this fast was already supposed to be started. On the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th of Tevet was supposed to be a fast day. 3 blows, 3 terrible blows we were given in Chodesh Tevet. Starting on the 8th of Tevet, began the translation of the Torah. What does it mean, the translation of the Torah? The Torah was a special secret with us and HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was our private language where the nuances, one word had so many levels of meaning. And when it was translated, that very private relationship where I felt it's just me and me alone, that feeling of exclusivity was taken. And I felt betrayed. On the 9th of Tevet is the yahrzeit of Ezra HaSofer. Thursday, light a candle. Ezra HaSofer represented the end of Nevuah. He was the last Navi. Ezra HaSofer, a sofer means to write, a scribe, but a sofer is also from the Hebrew word lispor, to count. Ezra HaSofer was the Navi who was responsible to make the divisions in the Parshiot. The Parshiot that we have, Bereshit, Va'era, Lech Lecha, all the different Parshiot, where it stops, where it ends. Ezra HaSofer did it. He counted 9 spaces and made, now there's a new Parsha, except for this week's Parsha, Vayechi. If you look in a Sefer Torah, or if you're looking at Tikkun, you'll see that this week's Parsha is called Stuma. Where the last letter of last week's Parsha ends, the next space is already Vayechi Yaakov. There's no space. There's no counting. Because there are times in our life where we feel like everything, it's just happening, and I'm so overwhelmed, and I don't even have a minute to breathe. And Ezra HaSofer tells us that that's the mark of Galus. When we feel like I'm just running like a chicken without a head, boom, 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 and I have no minute to breathe and take a deep breath and reground myself. Says Ezra Sofer, go into the space of Vayechi. Remember what it is that you're living for. Because when we get caught in the little details of the craziness of life, we forget what the whole point of it is. When we don't know how to count space, Yaakov Avinu begged Hashem when he sent gifts to his brother Esav. When the Ish Chalak sent gifts to the Ish Seir, he begged Hashem, V'revach tasimu bein eder le'eder. Make space between their tragedies, Hashem. Every day, in addition to all of the news that we hear, this one's in the hospital, that one's diagnosed, this sudden, that unexpected, we wake up to this reality that we have hostages who have been taken from us and are still not returned. The mother of Alexander, I don't know if you ever watched Sapir Cohen, one of the hostages who was brought back. Her story is unreal. I highly recommend listening to her, Sapir Cohen. So she was kidnapped with her boyfriend, Alexander ben Leah, and the father was killed. Alexander's father was killed, and the mother was also returned back home. And Alexander is still a hostage. And they interviewed his mother. And his mother said, I still haven't been to the grave of my husband who was murdered on that day. And they say to her, why not? How could you have not visited? And she said, I'm not going until Alexander comes home and he comes with me. And they said to her, he'll also come. Why aren't you going now? And she says, because I need to make sure that I have something that's going to force me to keep on waiting for him. I desperately want to go and throw myself on my husband's grave and beg him to intercede with mercy. But she says, I'm afraid if I go, I'll have some kind of closure and I won't feel that same. I need to wait for Alexander because if I don't wait for him, I'm never going to make it to the kever. And they said, what do you mean that you need to feel that intensity of waiting for him? And she says to the camera, because if I don't wait for him, he will die. Such depth. If I don't wait for my dreams, if I'm not actively waiting and pining, Lishuascha kiviti Hashem, every month has a shevet also associated with it. The month of Tevet is the shevet of Dan. When Yaakov Avinu in this week's parsha is blessing Dan, in the middle of his blessing, it's like Yaakov Avinu sits up and he goes out of character and he says, Lishuascha kiviti Hashem. I'm yearning for your Yeshua, Hashem. And you know, very often in order to protect ourselves, and it's a good defense mechanism, we try to say, I'm going to be happy with a little. And Emunah is being happy with what I have. But Emunah doesn't end with being happy with what I have. It's being happy with what I have and believing that Hashem can also give me so much more. I'm happy with what I have, and Hashem, the next second I want more. And it's not a contradiction. Because Yeshuat Hashem, keheref ayin. In a minute, Hashem can change everything around. And Chodesh Tevet is when we charge ourselves. Lishuascha kiviti Hashem. To have that dream and to not let it go, to wait for it. And on the 10th of Tevet, Yerushalayim is besieged. Now very quickly, because I'm sure most of you know this, when the enemy came, they knew that Yerushalayim was impossible to fight against the Jews. They didn't even try. And so what they did was they said, we're going to encamp around Yerushalayim, will create a siege, and will slowly starve them out. The Jewish people looked out the window, they said, wow, that's quite a formidable army. Oh well, I guess travel restrictions are limited. But the Jewish people inside Yerushalayim were not worried one bit. You know why? Because in Yerushalayim there were storehouses with 22 years worth of food. The people of Yerushalayim were independent in Yerushalayim, and so okay, it was a little inconvenient. You couldn't travel, you couldn't go up north, you couldn't go down south, but knew we don't need to worry about this siege that's around us. Now the 10th of Tevet was the siege. The siege eventually led to the terrible tragedy of Tisha B'Av, to the terrible tragedy of our temple being destroyed. How much time between the siege and the destruction of the temple? Okay, so that's the correct wrong answer. You were supposed to just go from Tevet until Av. It's 6-7 months, right? Wrong. 2.5 years. What? For 2.5 years, they besieged us. But we weren't worried. We had food inside. It was like COVID times. You can't go out. Okay. 2.5 years, we lived like it without any kind of fear from the enemy. And what happened? It wasn't the enemy who brought us down in the end. Hopefully this year we won't have to say this story again in Chodesh Av, but it's the tragic story of the infighting, of the civil fighting between the Jewish people. After 2.5 years, the Biryonim said, no, we're going to just sit here in Yerushalayim and just not be able to go out. Let's show them who we are. We're so strong. And the Chachamim said, if you don't need to fight, we don't fight. We're going to just sit here. We're going to look inwards. We don't have to fight outwards. And the Biryonim, the Jews, said, we got to get these rabbis to agree with us, to go fight. We're strong. And how'd they do it? The Jews went and burned down the storehouses of food. And the Jews of Yerushalayim began to starve. And once the Jews of Yerushalayim began to starve, that's when our enemies were able to penetrate the walls. And so that's the tragedy of Tisha B'Av. So what's the big deal about Asarah B'Tevet? Okay, yeah, it was a siege. Okay, yeah. But nothing happened for 2.5 years. What's the big deal? Jews have gone through much, much worse. Why do we commemorate that as a fast day? If anybody would be traveling in the wild, in the jungle, on a safari, and you see a lion, and you see the lion in the wild, and you hear a lion roar, it imposes fear, awe. You don't try to get in the lion's face. You just stay quiet. You don't want the lion to see you, to notice you. It's an unbelievable, majestic, and beautiful animal, and scary. But we've also all been to the zoo. And when you go to the zoo and you see the lion, what do? You try to tap on the glass. If nobody's around, you tell your kids to take sticks and start hitting on it. You try to make faces at the lion. Anything you could do to try to get a rise out of the lion. Why? Aren't you scared? And the answer is, I'm not scared because the lion is now in a cage. And the most powerful, majestic, awe-inspiring animal becomes la'ag v'keles, a mockery, because it's behind a cage. On Asarah B'Tevet, on the 10th of Tevet, the Lion of Israel, the Jewish people, we were untouchable. All of a sudden, we were put behind a cage. And we became la'ag v'keles lagoyim. They could look at us, they could laugh at us, they could tell us, oh, genocide, this, that, the other. They could start telling us, you're like this, you're like that. They could open their mouths and start to make fun and weigh in with their opinions on what we do. The 10th of Tevet is not a fast that commemorates something that happened. The 10th of Tevet is a Yom Din. We have Rosh Hashanah, which is a Yom Din. We have Tu B'Shvat, which is a Yom Din. We have different judgment days throughout the year. Asarah B'Tevet is a judgment day for what? For whom? For Yerushalayim. For the Beis HaMikdash that we all are waiting for. for this Mashiach that everybody says, hopefully Mashiach is coming, hopefully Mashiach is coming. Guess what? It's this Friday that Hashem decides if there's going to be Beis HaMikdash and Mashiach in Tafshin Pei Hey. This Friday that we'll fast into Shabbat, where we say to Hashem, Vayechi, what is it that I live for, Hashem? What are my values? What is it that I truly, deeply want? What am I waiting for that I won't stop waiting for because I don't want it to die? And based on what does Yerushalayim get judged? If our Beis HaMikdash was destroyed because of Sinat Chinam, then says Rav Kook, it will be built through Ahavat Chinam. Yerushalayim is judged based on how much Klal Yisrael loves each other. How much we're willing to go out of our way for another Yid, for another Jew, and send love. And so how do we prepare ourselves for this fast? Every single one of us needs to make a phone call, send a text, make a comment, something between now and Friday that's going to take tension and maybe a legitimate trauma that I had and melt it in some capacity. The freezing cold of Tevet, which tends to keep things strong, needs to be melted by love. Each one of us has to reach out to someone to somehow increase in Ahavat Chinam, to in her heart send out love to Am Yisrael, to the Jewish people. When they want to bury Yaakov Avinu, they get there with the Levaya, Yaakov is in the coffin, and they're getting ready to go into Ma'arat HaMachpelah and to bury him. And there's commotion. Esav comes and he says, no, this is not your property. This is my property. I was the firstborn, and I have the rights on Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And the brothers begin to argue with Esav, and they say, no, we have documentation. You signed it to our father Yaakov. When you sold him the Bechorah, this land was transferred to him. And Esav is saying, no. And they say, well, we're going to get the papers. Where are the papers? Nobody brought the papers. Okay, Naphtali, he was so fast how he ran. Run back to Egypt, bring the papers. And as Naphtali is running back to Egypt to bring the papers, and they're arguing, Dan had a son. His name was Chushim. Chushim was deaf. And he sees everybody is arguing. And he sees his grandfather's coffin out in the sun. And he doesn't understand what's going on. Hello, people, we need to bury grandfather Yaakov. And he sees this hairy red man making trouble. And what does Chushim do? Before Naphtali makes it back, Chushim takes out his sword and slices off Esav's head. There's the medrash that Esav's head rolls into Ma'arat HaMachpelah. And now the procession continues and they bury Yaakov Avinu. Now let me ask you something. How come Chushim was the only one who came up with this idea? Shimon and Levi were no weaklings. They killed the entire town of Shechem. You needed deaf Chushim to think like, we're going to just chop off his head and boom, chalas, we're done? And the answer is that sometimes we get so caught in the details. The Shvatim were so caught in the argument with Esav. No, but we're right. And we have proof that we're right. And they were so caught up in the details of the argument that they didn't realize that if they could step back, there's a solution that they weren't even paying attention to. It was quite a violent solution, but something they were definitely capable of. Why was Chushim able to do it? Because he was deaf. He was deaf to the chit-chat of the details of life. In Chodesh Tevet, Hashem wants us to turn down the volume of the outside world, of the chit-chat of our dings and our pings and our scrolls and this sister-in-law and that brother-in-law and that family did and that family didn't and how come she is and I'll never forgive him for. He wants us to turn down that volume and make ourselves deaf and say, wait a second, what's really my goal? My real goal is to live a life where I'm going to be proud of the kind of human being that I am, irrelevant of how inappropriate all of them acted. How am I going to act? Who am I going to be? Can I be the bigger one? Can I find, like a mountain goat, inside resources that are more powerful and overwhelmingly good and tov? You know what's interesting? Of all of the tribes, Dan, Shevet Dan, of this month of Tevet, became one of the biggest tribes. Now you would think Shevet Binyamin had 10 sons. They're going to be a huge tribe. But Shevet Binyamin becomes the smallest tribe in Israel. Dan has one child. He has one child, and his one child is deaf. What's going to come, thinks Dan, of my Shevet? I'm probably not going to have a big impact. I'm probably not going to have a big Shevet. So what does Dan do? What does anybody do when we feel like, I need a nest? I need something that I'm not in control over. Hashem, I need you. Dan begins to pray. And Dan davens and he prays, Hashem, please let my progeny be great and be big. And guess what? Shevet Dan, that comes from one son who was deaf, becomes one of the biggest tribes of Am Yisrael. Because that's the koach of tefillah. That's the koach of prayer. And in order for my tefillah to be ultra strong and powerful, I need to tap in to achrayut, to responsibility, to vayechi, to my life. What am I living for? Who am I when the lights are off in the darkness of Tevet? Who's my dream of who I want to be? Can I hold on to that? Can I pursue that? And on Friday, Yehirat Son, can I take upon myself, Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha? Can I find someone who's hurt me legitimately? They did wrong, they did bad. And find a way to forgive them. Or to forgive them a little bit. To forgive the intensity of my emotions. Why? Lema'anach Yerushalayim. For you, Yerushalayim, that we should hear Od Yishama Be'arei Yehuda Kol Sason Ve'Kol Simcha, that we should be able to hear voices of joy, that we should be able to hear Klal Yisrael completely redeemed in every sense of the word, from every single prison, whether it's a physical prison situation, a spiritual prison situation, an emotional prison situation, with the building of the Beis HaMikdash HaShlishi Keheref Ayin. It's already built, ladies. We don't have to wait and get permits for construction. Keheref Ayin. Yehi Ratzon, we should be zoche to see it berachamim with our own eyes. Tafshin Pei Hey. Thank you, ladies.